Hello. Hello, police. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Going feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. The following article comes from 1996 with the headline, Hit and Mystery. On December the 7th last year, at 8 o'clock in the morning, bricklayer Ken Jiggins and turkey farmer Peter Theobald tramped through the snow to feed pheasants kept on a farm in Rettendon, South Essex. When they reached a padlocked gate that led to a fishing lake beyond, they were surprised to find a Range Rover parked in front of it. In the bleak stillness of the snow-bleached countryside, they peered through the car's frosted windows. Inside, they could make out the figures of 3 men sitting slumped in their seats. "They looked so peaceful, we thought they were asleep," Theobald later remarked. But they were dead. In one of the most astonishing multiple murders to have taken place in this country, Tony Tucker, 38, Pat Tate, 37 and Craig Rolfe, 26, had been shot dead at point-blank range with such precision that there was virtually no blood and no sign of a struggle. On the gate was a notice with the message, "Countryside Premium Scheme. Farming operations must still take place, so please take special care to avoid injury. The use of guns or any other activity which disturbs people or wildlife are not allowed on this land. Enjoy your visit." The hitman did not pay the sign much heed. He had carried out the triple execution with chilling accuracy. Rolfe, the driver, was first killed, with a single shot to the back of his head. His foot was on the brake pedal and his hands on the steering wheel, as if he had stopped at traffic lights. Then came Tucker, also blasted with a single shot to the back of the head. He was still holding a mobile phone. Only Tate in the back seat showed any signs that he had tried to move. He had taken a bullet in the stomach, police believed, to immobilise him before he too was shot in the head. This was no ordinary murder, but bore the hallmarks of a carefully planned, cold-blooded assassination that brought to an end the criminal careers of 3 notorious underworld figures. Okay, so just cutting here during this article, as interestingly there it mentions that the police believe that Tate was shot in the stomach simply to immobilise him. Now I'm sure many of you will have watched the films regarding these murders or possibly read some of the books. And oftentimes in these sort of, dramatisations of the murders, it talks about Tate being shot in the stomach, the gunman having words with Tate, explaining that he's the catalyst for these murders, he's the reason that these murders are taking place. This sort of byplay between the gunman and Tate is taking place. And this really isn't ever something I've actually subscribed to personally. I've always thought that the reason he was shot in the stomach was simply that, just to immobilise him. I think another point of interest is also the fact that this article comes from 1996, and I believe the trial of Steele and Wombs didn't actually take place until 1998. Now, a lot of people who take a brief look into this case will often say, how did Darren Nichols know that Tate was shot in the stomach? How did he know that he was begging for his life or he was squealing like a baby? How would Nichols have known that if he wasn't there? Well, quite simply, there was so much information actually put out there in the media, and I think the defence for Wombs and Steele even mentioned this during the trial. The fact that the back window was smashed, the fact that Tate received a shot to his abdomen, all of these things were sort of brought up in Darren Nichols' story. The fact that he said that Tate smashed the window with his fist, that he was shot in the stomach, that he was squealing, begging for his life almost. All of these little details were actually public knowledge. Anyway, let's continue from where we left off. The victims had cut a brutal swathe through the local scene, building an unenviable reputation and reaping huge rewards from extortion, murder, drug dealing, intimidation and plain thuggery. A team of 15 police officers have spent months poring over the evidence, so far to little avail. It is a classic detective case, says Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley, the officer who took charge of the case. He said, quote, "There is no shortage of suspects, because they are known criminals and are associates of known criminals. Normally, with a murder inquiry, once you've got a suspect, you're home and dry. With this case, our problem is actually determining who is the real suspect." Okay, so quite an interesting turn of phrase there from Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley. Now, if we cast our minds back to the book Blogs 19, which was co-written by Darren Nichols, it's in there where this detective appears. In that book, he mentions that just a few days after the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, that they had their prime suspect. Michael Steele was that man. They got this information via Donna Jaggers, the girlfriend of Craig Rolfe, who submitted some statements in 1996 stating that Craig Rolfe was involved with Michael Steele along with Pat Tate and Tony Tucker. They were going down there to do some sort of deal that evening. Michael Steele was the person that they were going to meet on the evening of December the 6th, and he was most likely the person that pulled the trigger. So interestingly there in the book, Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley was very clear. He had great clarity of mind that it was Michael Steele that was the prime suspect. They knew this very early on in the piece. Yet in this article from 1996, it's almost as if they're still looking for the person who committed these murders. It's almost as if they don't have any good leads, any good evidence, any good information, any sort of credible sort of information coming forward from the public or people close to the deceased. Almost as if they're really struggling to get any sort of lead at all at this point. Also interesting to note that Donna Jaggers' statements didn't actually even appear until 1996, which I've always found incredibly bizarre, to be perfectly honest. The fact that she supposedly came forward after the initial press conference that she was a part of, just I think a day or two after the murders, and gave this information to detectives saying that they were going to meet Michael Steele. I've always found it incredibly odd that her actual official police statements weren't taken until quite some months later in 1996. Anyway, let's continue from where we left off. The Range Rover was hoisted away with the dead men still inside and virtually taken apart by the police, but it was found to contain no substantial clues, no fingerprints and no solid forensic evidence. All the pointers are that whoever took them to their deaths is likely to have been a close and trusted associate. They were found with no weapons on them, which is unbelievable for those three, says Ray, not his real name, a former associate of Tucker. There's no reason on the planet to go down that track. If they had wanted to have a meet, as the police have suggested, they would have done it in one of their places, or at a club. All their deals were done by their minions in garage services. They weren't stupid. They were under surveillance quite regularly. Dibley confirms that when police searched the dead men's houses after the murders, a gun was found secreted in Tate's. Okay, so I'm just going to cut in again here, as when you reread this is actually really interesting. This guy Ray, it says it's not his real name, supposedly a former associate of Tucker, states the following. They were found with no weapons on them, which is unbelievable for those three. There's no reason on the planet to go down that track. If they'd wanted to have a meet, as the police have suggested, they would have done it at one of their places, or at a club. All of their deals were done by their minions in garage services. They weren't stupid. They were under surveillance quite regularly. Now, what's interesting about that is that if we cast our mind back to the submachine gun for one moment, this was conducted at a service station by Craig Rolfe, the driver, the gopher, however you wish to describe him. So you have to give a little bit of credibility here to what this guy Ray is saying. He appears to know, I guess, at least some of the workings of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe's business. So why did they actually go down the track? To me, that tells me that they were indeed, in fact, with someone that they trusted. Either that, or there was an incredibly lucrative reason for them to head down there unarmed. Maybe they were meeting someone that they trusted, or there was someone in the Range Rover with them. The only other way that I can envision them ending up in such a vulnerable situation is if they met someone elsewhere and they were sort of ushered to that location, unaware of what lay ahead. What's always given me the impression that that's a possibility is when we take a look back at Donna Jagger's statement. It was in her statement that she recalls that meeting with Mick Bowman at the service station. She recalls Mick Bowman being incredibly paranoid, saying that he wanted to move somewhere else. He wanted to drive somewhere else to do the deal. He wanted Craig Rolfe to follow him in the Range Rover to somewhere else where they were going to, change over the gun for the money or this, that and the other. And I guess that's the only way that I can envision something like this taking place. Let's just imagine for one moment that Tucker, Tate and Rolfe pull up into that pub car park. It's dark. The person they're going to meet says, well, I think I'm being followed, or I think there was someone following me. Do you mind if we go somewhere else? Just follow me. Is that another way that they could have been lured down the lane? That's the only way that I can imagine them being found in such a vulnerable situation. Anyway, let's continue from where we left off. The real mystery isn't that someone hated these notorious figures enough to have them killed, but that their killer was able to lead them unarmed and unsuspecting down a country lane like lambs to the slaughter. Even to begin to unravel Detective Superintendent Dibley's classic case, you have to appreciate just how these three men rose to such criminal prominence. They can be linked to the ecstasy-related death of Leah Betts, as well as a host of cases of murder, torture and extortion. Tucker, Tate and Rolfe lived and acted like latter-day craze, but their patch, rather than being confined to the old criminal heartland of the East End, extended across South Essex. Essex at first seemed an unlikely location for vicious gangland retribution. Dibley's office is no rundown inner city nick. The brand new South Woodham Ferrers police station comes complete with surveillance cameras, electronic entry systems and pristine no-smoking offices. As you drive through the town's deserted streets on a sunny morning, it feels as if you're in a real-life version of Legoland, where neat, modern terraced houses meet the main drag in perfect crescents and cul-de-sacs. Like Basildon, South Woodham Ferrers is an overspill town designed to be a working-class paradise. But what the social engineers apparently failed to consider was that as the inhabitants poured out of the slums of the East End, they would take their criminals with them. No amount of architectural planning can obliterate the bleak lowlands that these towns were built on. The desolation of the crowded East End slums and a life of no prospects has been replaced by the desolation of row upon row of modern houses with no pubs, no community and no prospects. Dance halls and beer have been replaced by nightclubs, techno and drugs. The craze Essex descendants have adjusted their operations accordingly. Although Tony Tucker's firm dabbled in traditional protection rackets, it was the 90s ecstasy boom which suddenly gave it the potential to earn huge money. At the tail end of the 80s, Tucker was building up a security business which saw him running doors from Raquel's to Club UK in Wandsworth. At that time, Tucker was still a small-time businessman with criminal leanings. He lived in a 2-bedroom house, drove a second-hand Granada, and his main vice was taking a bit of door money on the side. As ecstasy moved out of underground rave culture and into mainstream clubland, having control of club security often meant having control of the drugs that went in and out. Dealers were prepared to pay substantial tithes for the exclusive right to carry out their illegal operations inside the clubs clandestinely and without harassment. Although he didn't sell drugs himself, Tucker became a fulcrum for deals between large drug firms. By 1992 he was considered big time, buoyed by drug profits, a fearsome reputation and a high-profile career as boxer Nigel Benn's minder. Tucker's personal drug of choice was not the ubiquitous love drug. He had always been a bodybuilder, and as the money rolled in, he started injecting a cocktail of the steroid Nubain and cocaine. At the same time, along with Tate and Rolfe, he instigated the regime of intimidation and violence that would eventually lead to his downfall. Ray said, quote, "He believed he was invincible. He was really just a stockbroker passing gear on. But he started getting nasty." Ray tells us of one of Tucker's early rip-offs. In keeping with his image as someone who had made it, he kept horses stabled near Basildon. He discovered that the owner was in debt and made discreet inquiries to find out exactly to whom he owed money. Armed with this information, Tucker sent a group of heavies into the stable owner's riding school bar. His henchmen smashed the place to pieces with iron rods. While they were at it, they attacked the barmaid. The next day, Tucker went to the owner and said he had heard that there had been trouble and knew who was behind it. He told him that if he could stable his horses there for free, he would ensure that there was no more violence. Tucker was starting to live and act as if he were the Essex equivalent of a mafia don. One Sunday morning, the peace of the sleepy village of Chafford Hundred was disturbed by the thud of high-volume dance music coming from his house in Diamond Close. Parked outside was his new, jet-black top-of-the-range Porsche, bearing the number plate TT9. Inside, Tucker was holding court with a few friends while he lay in bed with his common-law wife, Anna. In an ostentatious display of his new money, he had hired a professional DJ to set up twin decks at the foot of the bed and spin tunes solely for his benefit. The bedroom was liberally decorated with pictures of Tucker and his celebrity friend Nigel Benn. Tucker wanted everyone to know he was the king of his sprawling South Essex manor. But his flamboyant display of criminal wealth was destined to be short-lived. A year later, Tucker had accrued enough money to buy a £250,000 luxury house in the village of Fobbing. 2 months after he had moved in, he was dead. There is a certain sad inevitability about Craig Rolfe's life of crime. His father ran a market stall in Basildon, but in the year of Rolfe's birth, his mother Lorraine was having an affair with another man, John Kennedy. On Christmas Eve 1968, Kennedy beat Rolfe's father to death with a £3 skittle. Kennedy was arrested and charged with murder, and Lorraine was subsequently charged with making false statements to cover up for him. She was sentenced to 18 months. Craig Rolfe was born in Holloway Prison in 1969. Rolfe's role in Tucker's firm is generally accepted as minor. He was basically a gopher for Tucker, says Dibley. He did a bit of driving, a few errands, whatever. He had a fairly serious cocaine habit of his own, so it was in his interest to just tag along with Tucker. But Rolfe was probably Tucker's most trusted friend, and he was certainly implicated in some of Tucker's most dubious scams. In October 1995, the police staged a televised raid on Club UK in Wandsworth. In order to escape arrest, a dealer dropped 800 pills on the floor. Tucker and Rolfe showed precious little sympathy for the dealer's plight. When he pleaded that he could not pay them their usual cut, they went round to his house and put a bowie knife to his throat. They told him that for every week he owed them money, they'd put another £500 on top. Just for good measure, they stole his TV and stereo. When Tate came out of prison in October, he was keen to re-establish his presence. The week he was released, he wrote off Tucker's Porsche after taking a mixture of Special K and cocaine. Detective Superintendent Dibley has now retired, but he remains convinced that it was Tate's behaviour which led to the Range Rover deaths. He said, quote, "There are a number of reasons why that may be the case. He might have got out of control through drugs and was upsetting the apple cart of what was a fairly slick operation. It might be because he was mouthy and violent that others were afraid that he would bring attention to himself and themselves because of his general behaviour. So they decided to take him out of the scene." But with Tate either in prison or hospital for much of the time the firm was on the ascendant, Tucker or Rolfe could equally have provided countless motives for all three being killed. Steve Ellis was still in hiding, and the Club UK dealer they threatened had disappeared to Greece. Either he or his associates would have a motive for the killing. So too would the rival firms to which Whittaker was affiliated. An alternative theory involves a huge consignment of cannabis with an estimated value of £2 million that was discovered by a farmer floating in a lake approximately 6 miles away from Rettendon in October 1995. Police believe it was dropped from a light aircraft and, but for the farmer's intervention, would have been picked up by a local gang. It has been suggested that Tucker, Rolfe and Tate were told of a second drop in another lake, and that is what persuaded them to drive down the lane where they met their deaths. Okay, I'll just cut in here during this part of the article. It's interesting that they mentioned that drop, which was approximately 6 miles away from Rettendon, and this is something that I've always found, a real bizarre coincidence potentially. The fact that we had this drop where the farmer found this cannabis in his pond, obviously a substantial amount of money was involved, and this was just really I think it was like 6 weeks before Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were killed. I just find that incredibly bizarre, and I can actually see that being a real, I guess, carrot in front of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe to lead them down that lane. We know that lane led to big fishing lakes. Could that have been the reason that they were down there that night? Was there a tip-off that another consignment was going to be flown in and dropped into the pond? Not so much that, it was the cocaine deal that we've been told about in terms of, the official narrative, that they were down there to rob this consignment of cocaine. But it was something to do with this previous parcel, this previous consignment, which was found in Mr. Halstrup's farm, around 6 miles away. Could that have some sort of bearing on why Tucker, Tate and Rolfe ended up down that lane? That's always struck me as really, really interesting, the fact that these were three individuals, heavily involved in drugs, selling and taking of drugs, and yet 6 miles away you had that massive consignment which was found just a few weeks before Tucker, Tate and Rolfe were found dead. Anyway, let's continue from where we left off. Police believe it's possible that the gunman could be the same man who took Tucker, Rolfe and Tate to their deaths. Dibley believes there is a great deal at stake here. He says, quote, "The word is going round that associates of Tucker's are watching with interest to see if the police make any arrests. He says, quote, if we fail, they will then seek their own retribution. Although the general public won't lose one moment's sleep because these people were taken away, there are people close to them who are capable of seeking retribution, if for no other reason than to avenge the death of a friend. But also, I suspect, to make sure they're not next. Because if the guy who's done this is prepared to shoot 3 of his close friends, anyone else close to him may be at risk. With ecstasy being bought for around £2 a tablet and then sold in clubs for £12 to £15, there are huge profits to be made. And as the Range Rover murders have demonstrated, there are people prepared to go to any lengths to protect these profits. Not only that, but there are a number of pretenders who idolise Tucker and Rolfe and aspire to take their place. What you've got to understand is the paranoia is everywhere in their world, says Ray. People are continually being ripped off and there are constant death threats. These firms want to make sure that they're not next. Many thanks for joining me for this video. Very shortly you'll be able to see some other videos from the channel, including the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. Take care. Cheers.